That which was from the beginning, which we have heard, which we have seen with our eyes, which we have looked upon, and our hands have handled the word of life. For the life was manifested, and we have seen it, and bear witness, and show unto you that eternal life which was with the Father, and was manifested unto us. That which we have seen and heard declare we unto you, that ye may also have fellowship with us. And truly our fellowship is with the Father and with His Son Jesus Christ. And these things write we unto you, that your joy may be full. Brother Bradley, can I get you to ask for blessing on the message this morning?
Dear Father, we thank you, dear God, for your word. And we pray, dear God, to open it to us, dear Father, and help the preacher. In Jesus' name, amen.
Amen. So, not preaching out of 1 John, but that section of Scripture is out of 1 John chapter 1, first 4 verses of 1 John chapter 1. I've been reading in that while I was away. For some reason, I've just felt very led to read some of John's writings. And so he taught this morning out of Revelation, which is another one of John's writings. And what I really like about Revelation, and I know it's a difficult book for people to understand, but what I really like about Revelation is in chapter 1, verse 3, it says, speaking of Revelation, blessed is he that readeth, and they that hear the words of this prophecy. So you can actually get a blessing. We got a blessing this morning just because he taught in Revelation. Now, isn't that something? I mean, there are some things, and I just kind of believe when God says something that He means it, that there's a blessing if you will read through the book of Revelation. There's a blessing if you'll just hear it. And that's just really something special to me. But John is an interesting character. There are some folks in the Bible that I've always been, and this is likely because of different things in my life or maybe different things that I'm going through, and maybe it changes from time to time. But there are different characters in the Bible, I won't say character because it doesn't sound real, but there are different folks from the Bible that I just connect with. And probably you have some folks from the Bible that when you read their books, that their book has a special meaning to you, that there's a connection that you get from them, something that you pick up, something about their personality or something that they're going through or something that they're writing about that connects with you on a level deeper than maybe the rest of the Bible does. And so everybody likely has those. For me, at different points in my life, it's been John. That was who I started off reading right after I got saved. And then through reading the Scriptures, I found others that really meant a lot to me. Certainly David, everybody, if you can't get a blessing from Psalms, then there's probably something wrong with you, because David has some wonderful stuff in there. But another one is Daniel. And Daniel has always been an author of the book of Daniel in the Old Testament that has meant a lot to me. There's a lot of things going on in Daniel that really connect dots to me, that I can really appreciate. And you're reading that kind of an author to you when just reading the words that they wrote, just reading what's in the Scripture about them, when it'll stir up a feeling inside of you. A kind of a feeling that's not like what you would get if you go to a sappy movie and they tug on your heartstrings and make you feel a certain way, but the kind of feeling that's just deeper, that has a lot more meaning. And so the book of Daniel has always been special to me. I've always enjoyed reading it and rereading it. And I started thinking the other day when I was trying to decide, well, what do I want to do on Sunday? And I thought there are a lot of different ways I could go, and there are a lot of different things that I could potentially do. And I started to realize that typically when I would do a message, that I tend to do things very topically based. In other words, I'll find a subject that I think may be keyed off of a verse, and I'll kind of run on a subject like that. And I started thinking about how when I used to go to church, at different times through my life, the messages that I really liked and the things that really spoke to me. And I started noticing that a lot of preachers will preach a message on a story in the Bible, and the stories are written there for our admonition and to teach us something. And I started thinking about how, isn't it true that we learn a lot by the stories that are relayed to us, because it allows us to make a connection with something that happened And sometimes in the case of a story, we almost take ourselves and we insert ourselves into the situation and wonder, well, what would we do in that situation? Can I identify with what this person's going through? Can I identify with how they feel? Would I make the same choices that they made? And that's why I think people go to movies, right? And in the scriptures, what God has for us is God has for us a book that he wrote with stories that were handpicked to teach us things, to help us on our way, things that are going to make us better, things that are going to make us focus our attention on the right things. And then on the other side of it, we have the world that makes movies, and they use those movies to try to influence you too. So you'll go to a movie, and maybe that movie, or television, really any of the motion picture type thing, where they're trying to key on your imagination, and they want to teach you different principles. They want to teach you different things. They want to tug on your heartstrings in different ways and lead you in a particular direction. And if a person were to spend enough of their time focusing on that, they would no doubt believe that, well, everybody has a homosexual friend and they're just like everybody else, and all they want is they just want, to be accepted and, to have their place in this world. And they try to convince people that certain things are true. I just picked that one. It could be a lot of things. I'm not picking on that one in particular, but they have a message that they're trying to deliver to you. They have something that they're trying to make you feel. They have a belief that they're trying to change in you, and they're trying to entertain you at the same time. But it works because it captures your attention, because it's a story, because it's something you remember. It's like stories and music, right? We can hear songs, and sometimes much later in life when we think, we can remember the words to, all the words in most cases, to songs that were on the radio when we were growing up. And we can remember the whole story in a movie. But interestingly, when looked at the Bible, a lot of times people don't have that same familiarity with the scriptures that they do with some of these other things. And the Bible's not a book like, I don't know, who's the popular author? Tom Clancy? Is that who it is? Okay, Clancy, who would write a book. And yeah, you can read a Tom Clancy novel, and it would be interesting. You could probably get some enjoyment out of it. Certainly if you're in a situation where you have a lot of time on your hands, you could read it and get some entertainment. You might even learn some things from it, possibly. And then probably when you're done with the book, you could take it and put it up on the shelf, and maybe some people might pull it back out and reread it again. If it was a really good novel or something, you might read it again and enjoy it. But typically you read it once and you put it up and then you're kind of done with it. And the Bible's not that kind of a book. The Bible's the kind of book also with stories that are designed to teach you things, that are designed to make you feel things, that are designed to instruct us. But the Bible's structured in such a way, because it's a collection of books, it's not a book, but it's a collection of books that have intertwined threads through them, to where you can reread a story, because now that when you're reading the story, you're remembering some things from some of the other books that you read and other stories, and you start noticing, hey, there are some connections here. And things make more sense. So it's not the kind of book that you read once and then you put on the shelf. If it was, then we could all just go through the Bible in a year, and then we could take it and stick it up on the shelf and we'd be done. And we wouldn't need it anymore. We could just talk about what we remember from the book. But that's not the kind of book we're talking about. So we're going to go to a story in Daniel, and I'm going to a story because I want you to see some things. Let's go to the book of Daniel, chapter 6. Daniel chapter 6. Now, as you're turning there, let me give you a little bit of a background, because I want you to understand kind of where things are at in relation to what we're going to take a look at. I want you to make sure that you understand. So the background on Daniel that I want everybody to keep in mind, because in your reading, I'm hoping that you'll take this and you'll build on it, is you have to understand that the book of Daniel was written, and Daniel had some contemporaries, some people that existed during his time that wrote books too, that have a different viewpoint, a different flavor on the same kind of timing of world events that were going on at that time. And you need to know that Jeremiah was a prophet that was before Daniel. Jeremiah was a prophet that actually prophesied about what was going to happen like we see at the beginning of Daniel. As a matter of fact, what he prophesied was so upsetting to Israel that they considered him a traitor, and that's why they took him and put him basically in the sewer. They dropped him in the sewer, and he was rescued out of it later and was kind of under a house arrest or under some kind of confinement until the Babylonians came in and did their thing. But you need to understand the connection with Jeremiah, number one. The other background thing I want you to keep in mind is you need to understand that Ezekiel was another contemporary about the same time as Daniel. And so you can see some things about Ezekiel in the book from a completely different perspective, because Daniel was one of the ones who were captured and taken into Nebuchadnezzar's palace, and they tried to re-educate him and integrate him into their society. So you get a specific viewpoint from him being around the king, being around the rulers, and in a different situation, where Ezekiel was taken with some of the Jews off down to the rivers of Babylon and worked with some of those that were carried in captivity, more of to do some work for them. And then also there's a connection with Habakkuk, Nahum, and Zephaniah. Not as strong a one, but it's important to know that they're all connected. So knowing that is really important, because again, understanding the book of Daniel, it's good to take some time and also look at Jeremiah and Ezekiel, and then go back and look at Daniel again and see if you can pick some things up. So we need to understand in chapter 1 it talks about where Nebuchadnezzar came in and besieged Judah, ransacked the house of God, captured the king's seat and the princes, and took them off away back to his palace. In Daniel chapter 2, and in Daniel chapter 1, Daniel distinguishes himself. He won't eat the king's meat, and he goes through all this stuff, but he distinguishes himself as being 10 times smarter than the guys that were around Nebuchadnezzar, the magicians and the astrologers and that kind of a thing. In chapter 2, that was where Nebuchadnezzar's dream comes up, and Daniel interprets it, and then that's the first time God recognizes that it's not just that Daniel's smart, but Daniel has a connection with God, and he can interpret things that nobody else could interpret. And this first time, kind of his introduction, so to speak, to the God of Israel. That's also where he's promoted over a large part of Babylon. Let's see, it says that he was promoted to ruler over the whole province of Babylon, and he, at his request, had Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego also set up over the affairs of the province. Chapter 3 is where Nebuchadnezzar sets up the image of gold, and the story of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, who went and bowed down before it, and they got cast in the fiery furnace. And here Nebuchadnezzar understands the God of Israel, but he says something where he recognizes that an image like unto the Son of God. So he's getting to know God a little bit better in chapter 3, and he proclaims that nobody will speak out against the God of Israel without a penalty. Chapter 4, Nebuchadnezzar now sees God's place in things, and Nebuchadnezzar, he understands his position in relationship to God a little bit more over the earth, but his pride creeps in. Remember? That's the story where, he's looking at everything he's got and how great everything he is, and he's speaking highly of himself, which is similar to Satan, who kind of lifted himself up. He understood that God was there controlling things, but he gave himself a little too much credit. And so God took his mind from him, and that was the story where he's out in the fields, and he was humbled for 7 years as an animal. And it ends with him not just understanding his place, but giving glory to God. And he makes an incredible proclamation that, reading, it really means something to read. And if you haven't, remember chapter 4, read what Nebuchadnezzar says at the end of chapter 4, when everything's all over. Chapter 5, Nebuchadnezzar's son, Belshazzar, to sum it up, sees the handwriting on the wall. Remember, he takes all the goblets and stuff from what they had captured from Israel, and he decides he's going to drink out of them, and he defiles them, and literally sees a hand with a finger writing on the wall that basically says, the kingdom's departed from him and he's done. So that's the history coming up through chapter 5. And then he is killed when Darius the Median comes in. And that brings us into chapter 6. And so I want you to have that background in mind. And now here's Daniel. He's since he was besieged and taken into captivity in Babylon, he is now under his third king, a king that came in and killed Nebuchadnezzar's son, because Nebuchadnezzar's son was wicked and did wrong, and has now taken over the kingdom. And now Daniel finds himself under him. And as we go into Daniel chapter 6, verse 1, let's take a look at what God has for us. And it pleased Darius to set over the kingdom 120 princes, which should be over the whole kingdom. And over these 3 presidents, of whom Daniel was the first, that the princes might give account unto them, and the king should have no damage. Then this Daniel was preferred above the presidents and princes, because an excellent spirit was in him, and the king thought to set him over the whole realm. So here Daniel has distinguished himself yet again. All right? Daniel distinguished himself because he had an excellent spirit in him, and that spirit we know was the Holy Spirit, because Daniel would do what he needed to do. He maintained his integrity through the whole time in his life in captivity here, and he did what he knew was right before God. And so because of that, God blessed him. And if you're a person that ever, by the way, ends up in a position where you are put in charge of something, maybe at work, maybe, in some organization or anything, certainly if anybody ever ended up as a leader in politics, you want to remember the story of Daniel, because God blessed, very similar to what happened with Joseph, God blessed the kingdom because of Daniel. That Daniel would do a great job for them. When he was put in his position of authority, he was honest, they could trust him, he was reliable, and as a conquered people, it bothered some folks that Daniel was put into that position of authority. But the reason why he was put there was because even Darius could look at Daniel and say, there's something different about this guy, and I can trust him. Even though he was conquered and brought in against his will, and his people are enslaved, I can trust him. Something that he saw in him that made him more valuable than folks from his own ethnic group. That excellent spirit. As a matter of fact, to quote earlier in the chapter, in chapter 4, verse 8, speaking of Nebuchadnezzar even said, "But at the last Daniel came before me, whose name was Belteshazzar, according to the name of my God, in whom is the spirit of the holy God." So Daniel had something about him. So if you wind up in a position of authority, you want to be like Daniel. You want to follow the example of Daniel. You want to follow the example of Joseph. And you want to do the right things. And you want God to bless your organization, company, whatever you're doing, because of your attitude towards God, because of what you do. It's very important. Daniel chapter 6, verse 4. Then the presidents and princes sought to find occasion against Daniel concerning the kingdom. But they could find none occasion or fault, for as much as he was faithful. Neither was there any error or fault found in him. Then said these men, "We shall not find an occasion against Daniel, except we find it against him concerning the law of his God." So they looked at him and they tried, because they didn't like him, they tried to find a reason to trip him up, a reason that they could get rid of him, because they didn't like him, they didn't like what he was doing, they didn't like that he was preferred over them. They probably had aspirations themselves of seeking a position and attaining one. And so they're looking for a problem with him. And let's just pretend for a second that it's like it was a job perspective that they're looking at him. They looked at him and they said, "Man, well, we can't go to the king when Daniel always comes into work late because he's here. Work starts at 8 o'clock. The guy's here 5 minutes early. And we can't go to the king and say, well, he just sloughs off because Work ends at 5 and the guy's there till 5:30 every day. And we can't say it's because he twists the policies to benefit himself a little bit, because he just follows them exact and he does exactly what he's supposed to do. You know, he doesn't take a little extra time at lunch. You know, they can't find anything wrong with him. They said if we're going to get this guy with anything, the only way we're going to be able to get him is if we can somehow snag him with his faithfulness towards his God. That's it, because he doesn't do anything wrong. You know, another thing about that speaks is that Daniel had some discipline about him. And that would be another thing I would recommend for folks. It's something we can learn from this story in Daniel. You know, the secret to being the best at something, or being good, maybe not the best, but being good at something, is in how you're disciplined in your approach to doing it. I mean, Joe, you want to be a trumpet player, and I know you like to be considered a good trumpet player. I don't know anything about playing the trumpet. I can't teach you how to blow in the mouthpiece, or, you know, the right way to hold the trumpet. I mean, I could maybe look it up on YouTube and tell you what I heard somebody else say, but I can't relate to you any personal experience that's going to make you better at that. But the one thing I can tell you is that if you're disciplined, if you practice every single day the right way, that you're going to get better. And I don't know a lot about banking, but I could tell a banker, if you're disciplined and you spend the time every day doing the things that you need to do, that you'll be successful. And it's a sad thing in life that really, if somebody wants to distinguish themselves at work, really all they have to do is do what they're supposed to do, and they will. You want to get ahead in work, you want to be the top employees, just do what you're supposed to do, because people don't. People are always looking the easy path. You know, they always want to take a little longer than they need to, or just kick back and relax. All you have to do is actually do what you're supposed to do, and you're going to be at the top of every list when it comes to things like work. That was Daniel. He was disciplined. He knew that he needed to continually improve his knowledge, improve what he was doing, and he spent the time to do that. But you know, when you're like that in your behavior, when you follow what God says, you know, he was praying 3 times a day. When you're doing all these things, you know, he was honest because God values honesty. He worked hard because God values hard work. I mean, he told us that we're supposed to work heartily as unto the Lord. So in anything we do, no matter who you work for, we're supposed to work hard. We're not supposed to think of it as, well, that guy's an unsaved guy, or this company's not a great company. We're supposed to work hard as unto the Lord, because we're representing God as a Christian in the work that we do. And Daniel was just like that. That was just his character. His personality was such that he worked. He put the effort into it. He did what he needed to do. And because of that, he was lifted up. He didn't seek the promotion. It came to him because he was just a different kind of a guy. And when you're like that, the world is not going to like you. Not just because you never cut out early, and not just because you don't take extra long lunches and make them look bad. They're not going to like you because by living your life under a code with a responsibility towards God, you're going to convict them in their heart of the things that they're doing wrong, and they're going to have a problem with that. You know, in John chapter 15, verses 18 through 19, it says, "If the world hate you, ye know that it hated me before it hated you," Jesus speaking. If you were of the world would love his own. But because ye are not of the world, but I have chosen you out of the world, therefore the world hateth you. So if you're doing the things you should do, the world's not going to like you. Just not. Later in John 17:14, "I have given them thy word," speaking to us, Jesus Christ again when he's praying, "I have given them thy word, and the world hateth them, because they are not of the world, even as I am not of the world." So we have a book, right, that we look at. And when we're making a decision about how we should believe about something, what should we do, what can we support, what can we not support, we have some place to go. We have a standard that we use that tells us whether or not we should do that thing. So if you're a Christian, and I mean, I know most of you that are here, but if someone's listening to this message on the internet, and you're a Christian, and you're wondering if you should support, homosexual rights or LGBTQZY, whatever it is out there, and you want to know, we've got someplace we can go and find out. I don't need to tell you what you should do. Pick up the book and read it yourself and see what God says about it. And do what God says to do. Don't do anything because I said or some politician said. Read the scriptures. It'll tell you how you should behave, how you should act, how you should deal with situations, and just do that. And because of that, that's why the world hates us. Because they'll tell us, the world is just a mess. It's just a mess. Everybody remembers in the beginning, because most of us have been around for a little while, Joe maybe not, but most of us remember, do we all remember when the argument was just, hey, look, you don't get it. The homosexuals, all they want is just to be accepted. They just want to be able to get married. They just care for each other. They just love one another. They just want to be able to get married. They're not asking for anything special. They just want to be treated the same as everybody else. That's what they used to say. What do we find out when things start to get inaccurate? That's not what they ever wanted. What they wanted was they wanted you to have to support their choice. They wanted you to have to accept it. They wanted you to have to deal with it. And if you have a problem with that, then they want to punish you. They will destroy your business. If you won't bake them a cake, like to use, and I don't want to go into the whole political side of it, but just by way of an example, so you know what they really want. It's not that they want to be able to come into your store and buy a cake. They want you to have to make them a cake that goes against everything you believe. And if Joe wasn't in here, I could tell you a story about this one guy who's been suing that baker in Colorado over and over again. I could tell you some of his requests. And they were ridiculous, offensive requests that baker refused to make a cake for. And so he's been sued by this guy like 3 times. Because what they want is they want to ruin you because you won't accept them. That's what the world wants when they hate us. Daniel 6:6. Then these presidents and princes assembled together to the king, and said thus unto him, King Darius, live forever. All the presidents of the kingdom, the governors and the princes, the counselors and the captains have consulted together to establish a royal statute and to make a firm decree. And whosoever shall ask a petition of any god or man for 30 days, save thee, O king, he shall be cast into the den of lions. Now, O king, establish the decree and sign the writing, that it be not changed, according to the law of the Medes and the Persians, which altereth not. Wherefore King Darius signed the writing and the decree. So what did they do? And this is what you got to watch about anybody in a position of power. Notice first off, they went right after his ego. Oh, king, you're such a great and wise king. We decided we're going to come up with a statute that says that nobody can ask any other god or any other man for anything. They should be coming to you with this. You're the one that's running this whole thing, right? You're the king. And so we came up with this great statute, and if someone isn't willing to just come to you with everything for 30 days just to show how much we all value, they should be tossed right into the den of lions, because we don't want people like that in our kingdom. And with his ego, he didn't spend any time thinking about it. We can identify with that, right? Don't we have kind of a president right now with a little bit of an ego problem? Right? Isn't that the risk of anybody in a position of authority, is that ego creeps in and someone can come up to you and say things in the right way and by your ego maybe get you to do something that you shouldn't do, that you should have taken a little more time to consider. So he signed it. Said, sounds good to me. Put his name on it. Also note that trouble always comes from wicked people who will twist the laws to try to catch a Christian. Isn't that what that baker story I was talking about doing? They took a law that was designed for a good purpose, just to say that you shouldn't discriminate against people and you can't refuse services to somebody just because you don't like the color of their skin or because of what church they choose to go to. These things sound pretty good. That if they walk into your restaurant, you can't say, "You're a Catholic. Get out. I don't serve Catholics in my restaurant." Or, "You're an African American. I don't serve African Americans in my restaurant." They take a law that was designed to do something good and they twist it to try and catch the Christian with something. And that's what they did here. Homosexuals do it all the time. Abortion rights, immigration rights, all that stuff. I mean, they just twist it a little bit. Take something that could be good and they misuse it. Daniel 6:10. Now when Daniel knew that the writing was signed, so this proclamation, he knew it was signed, was handled, when Daniel knew it was, he went into his house, and his windows being open in his chamber toward Jerusalem, he kneeled upon his knees 3 times a day and prayed and gave thanks before his God as he did aforetime. So when he knew this had happened, that didn't change the way Daniel operated. Now I'll tell you what, that means a lot to me to read that verse, right? It means a lot for me to read that verse because it means that Daniel knew that the penalty, Daniel worked for the king. He was the preferred guy. He was like number 2. He absolutely knew what had happened and knew absolutely what the penalty was. This wasn't ignorance of the law. He absolutely knew. But he knew that God is first over everything else. And so just like he always did, he went into his house. He wasn't even embarrassed about it. It didn't say he closed his windows. Don't you think it's interesting that it says in there with his windows being open? That they specifically called that out. So he wasn't even trying to hide it. He thought, I'm going to pray to God just like I always have. And so he did. They laid the trap for him. They counted on him being faithful to his God. He was as faithful as they knew he would be, and now they've got him. You know, where Christians nowadays, sometimes Christians are afraid to stand with Jesus Christ in front of the world. Daniel wasn't afraid to do it when his life was at stake. You know, with Christians who sometimes have a hard time saying, that don't pray in public because they don't want everybody to look at them funny, or they don't want to hand out a tract to somebody because they don't want, people to say he's a weirdo or something, or they don't want to be seen in their office or at work with a Bible because then they're just going to be one of those Bible thumpers that nobody wants to talk to, weirdos kind of a thing. Daniel's life was on the line. He knew that the penalty for petitioning his God, which is what prayer is, it's a petition. As a matter of fact, it even said it wasn't just that you couldn't petition a man, any man or God. He knew that if he did that the result was thrown into the lion's den, and he did it anyway. His obedience was routine. It was disciplined, like I said before. And I know some of you can identify this. I certainly know that Mr. DeVore can. When you're in the military, and they're trying to prepare you for when you get into a situation where things are happening and you have to react, when there isn't time for you to sit back and say, I wonder what I should do in this situation. So they're firing at me and they're charging at me too. Maybe, no. You have to know what you're going to do right then. It has to be ingrained in you. You train and you drill over and over again until the response is automatic. That's what the goal is. The goal is that when it happens, you react. And if they can train you to do that, your chance of survivability and those around you goes up. Because if you have to stop and think, sometimes that's too late. And Daniel was disciplined like that. He didn't stop and think about what was going on. It said that he just did what he did aforetime. It was just Daniel to go and pray 3 times a day. He didn't have to stop and wonder anything about it. He just went and did it. And in life, we should strive to do that too. Do we think about the things in our life? Do we have the routines, the discipline in the stuff that we do that drives us to do the right thing, to where if they were to come tomorrow and pass a law that says you can't go and stand on the street corner and preach because that's hate. And if you spew hate, we're going to lock you up in jail. And then July comes around next year and it's time for us to go street preaching. Are you going to go out because that's just what you do? Or are you going to step back and say, well, I don't know, let me think about this a little bit. Do you have the discipline that if they passed a law in the United States that you can't pray, are you going to keep praying? Or are you going to step back and say, I don't know, well, let me think about this. You can't read, you can't have a Bible. You know, in North Korea, if you get caught with a Bible, that might mean you go to one of those, I don't think they call them concentration camps, but re-education camps. Well, basically, they send you off for just having a Bible. There are some places where just having a Bible can mean a lot to you. But he was disciplined. It was just part of his normal routine. Do you prepare yourselves so that when the time comes and you're going to have to make a decision on what you're going to do, that it's not a decision to be made, it's just something you're going to do? What are you going to do when? Do you prepare? Are you ready for these kind of things? Daniel was ready because it was just a part of what he did all the time. I have a feeling Daniel not only prayed 3 times a day, Daniel probably was reading what he had all the time too. He never had to question whether he should do something. That's just what I do. He says, I find myself in this situation with all this responsibility, and who am I? I'm some guy that was captured and brought into captivity, and then because God was with me, I get promoted to this position. What do I know about the Medes and the Persians? Being responsible for not only 2 other, presidents at my level, being over them, but then the 120 below them. What do I know about all that? And how well do I know the laws of the Medes and the Persians? The only way I'm going to do a good job at this at all is if you help me, God, because, it's me. And that was Daniel's attitude. He prayed 3 times a day because he needed to pray so that he could do a good job, so that he could do what God would want him to do in the situations he was in. Because he looked at the responsibility that he had and he took it seriously. Daniel 6:11. Then these men assembled and found Daniel praying, doing just what they knew he was going to do, and making supplication before his God. They were watching for him to be faithful. He was easy to catch. Then they came near and spake before the king concerning the king's decree. Hast thou not signed a decree that every man that shall ask a petition of any god or man within 30 days, save thee, O king, shall be cast into the den of lions? Question. The king answered and said, the thing is true, according to the laws of the Medes and the Persians, which altereth not. Then answered they and said before the king, that Daniel, which is of the children of the captivity of Judah, he's one of those Jews that we brought over, regardeth not thee, O king, nor the decree that thou hast signed, but maketh this petition 3 times a day. Then the king, when he heard these words, was sore displeased with himself, and set his heart on Daniel to deliver him, and he labored till the going down of the sun to deliver him. When he realized, the king, what he had done, he was angry with himself. How could I have allowed my ego to fool me like this and put my friend Daniel, who I trust, in this situation? Of course I knew he would be faithful and he's going to pray to his God. That's what I liked about him, because he's faithful. And now this decree that I signed takes his faithfulness, and now because of it he's in danger. And he tried to find a way to get out of it. Then these men assembled before the king. So he labored all day trying to come up with a way, and said unto the king, know, O king, that the law of the Medes and Persians is that no decree nor statute which the king establisheth may be changed. They're going, king, you've got to follow the law. Evidently, the law of the Medes and the Persians is a little better than the law of the United States of America. Because in the United States of America, a president can evidently say, I don't like those immigration laws, so just ignore them. Let them in. It's against the law for them to come in, but I don't like that law. So just ignore it. In the United States, I guess you can do that. I don't like that law, so we're not going to enforce it. You know, there are laws on the books against homosexuality, still exist, on the books of many states in the United States. They just ignore them. They don't enforce them. They didn't change the law. They didn't remove the law. Just ignore it. I don't know that there's much positive to say about the Medes and the Persians, but at least when they made a law, everybody had to follow it. And that's just something I thought about when I read it. Then the king commanded, and they brought Daniel and cast him into the den of lions. Now the king spake and said unto Daniel, and now listen to this, the king spake and said unto Daniel, thy God, whom thou servest continually, he will deliver thee. He will deliver thee. He wasn't worried. No, he was worried. But this Gentile king, who only knows about God because of how faithful Daniel was, because of his testimony, because of his reliability, because he did what he was supposed to do, he said, if God's going to deliver anybody, he's going to deliver Daniel. Maybe God's mad at me for signing that decree. How can he be mad at Daniel? Daniel, I think you're going to be okay. But he was still worried about it. And a stone was brought and laid upon the mouth of the den, and the king sealed it with his own signet. It's like a ring you wear. And the seal was a way to make sure, because only the king had that, right? So if he seals it, now there's a seal, and if anybody were to remove that stone and get him out, the seal would be broken and everybody would know. So the seal was designed to keep him safe in there. And with the signet of his lords, so it wasn't just his, so he couldn't even come back later and break it and say, well, I'll just come and reseal it later. They had him. The presidents and they all had him. That the purpose might not be changed concerning Daniel, then the king went to his palace and passed the night fasting. Neither were instruments of music brought before him, and his sleep went from him. Here's a Gentile king that, because of David's example, believed so much and was so concerned for a Gentile that he was praying and fasting. He wouldn't eat. He knew he screwed up. I messed up. He didn't know the story we knew about, like Ahab. Maybe he did. Maybe he heard the story about how God passed that judgment on Ahab, and because Ahab wore sackcloth and fasted and stuff, and God looked at him and said, look how he humbled himself before me. But this king humbled himself with fasting. He was trusting in God to save Daniel because of how faithful Daniel was, because of what he learned about God because of Daniel. And you know what? God looked at that situation and he delivered Daniel, as we're going to see, because of that. Now, I say that because, number one, what a testimony Daniel had. What a testimony Daniel had. Where even the king knew God's got to deliver Daniel. I mean, Daniel, he's just faithful. There's nothing wrong. I mean, he was so good that I promoted him above my own people. He had a real testimony, one that even an unsaved Gentile king couldn't miss. I wish we had a president like that now. Could look at the testimony of someone and say, would know God because of the testimony of a faithful man around him. I would that we were that fortunate. Does this mean that God will always deliver us when we wind up in a situation? Am I trying to say, am I a prosperity person that says when you get thrown into the lion's den, God's going to be there and you're going to be okay? No, I'm not saying that, because God will always deliver us from everything. He won't always deliver us from it, but he will always deliver us at least through it. In this case, God delivered him from it. Sometimes things happen. We've read the stories, martyrs who were hauled before in the Spanish Inquisition. Joe, I know you probably don't know this, and maybe some of you don't either, but there was a time when believing in Jesus Christ could get you hauled before a kind of a religious court, and if they couldn't get you to denounce your faith, they basically would try to torture you until you did, and then kill you, so that you didn't go against the rules of the church. You had to denounce your faith. And they killed many Christians. During Rome, they would take Christians and throw them into the arena and release lions on them, similar to what Daniel had, and the lions killed a bunch of Christians. God didn't deliver all of them from the lion. Sometimes we get delivered from it, and sometimes we get delivered through it. But God's there all the time. Then the king rose very early in the morning and went in haste unto the den of the lions. And he came to the den and cried with a lamentable voice. I love that, lamentable. What does it mean to lament? It's when you're like really sad and down, distraught. Unto Daniel. And the king spake and said, Daniel, O Daniel, servant of the living God, is thy God, whom thou servest continually, able to deliver thee from the lions? I don't know how long he didn't hear anything, but I can hear him in my head calling out, Daniel, are you okay? Daniel, I thought if anybody was going to be okay, it'd be you. Did God deliver you, Daniel? Daniel! Then said Daniel unto the king, O king, live forever. My God hath sent his angel, and hath shut the lions' mouths, that they have not hurt me. Forasmuch as before him innocency was found in me, and also before thee, O king, have I done no hurt. I don't know what happened for sure when he was in that den with the lions. I really don't know. I've read some stories in the Bible, though. That's what I'm saying. You read different things and you come back and read it again. But I've read some stories, though. I remember Balaam on his donkey riding off to curse the children of Israel, and his donkey sees the angel of the Lord there with a sword out. He was going to kill him. And the donkey stopped. And Balaam couldn't see it, and Balaam's like hitting on the donkey and doing all that stuff, trying to get that donkey to move on. And then at some point, the donkey actually talks to him, and then he opens up Balaam's eyes, and Balaam can see what the donkey was protecting him from. I know that story. I also know the story that's told in 2 Kings, and I want you to read this one, so write this down. I'm not going to go into it. 2 Kings chapter 6, verses 8 through 17, where they're surrounded by an enemy that come in to wipe them out. And the prophet gets up and says, hey, don't worry. Them that be with us are more than them that are against us. And the kid's like, what are you talking about? And he said, God opened his eyes, and he saw all around chariots of fire and just angels. I mean, just ready to come in and just get it done. It's a blessing that we can't see the spiritual stuff around us, because I don't know that we could handle it if we saw the wicked and the evil that was around us. But we're not here alone. And when we get in situations and we're honoring God, when we're doing what we're supposed to do, we're not there alone. And I don't know what those people who are going through torture to try to get to renounce what they believe, or those Christians that were thrown in to the Colosseum and the lions turned loose on them. I don't know exactly what happened, because the Bible doesn't talk about it, but they weren't in there alone. There's a really good movie, I've heard Pastor talk about it, Tip of the Spear, that you can see on Netflix. And it's basically a story about some missionaries that were killed on the Amazon. And one of the guys that killed them, when he fessed up to the guy's son that he killed, said that he saw angels. While they were in the process of killing him, they saw angels all around him. We don't know what people go through, what people experience and see, but I know we're not alone. And I think that angel of the Lord showed up, and those lions will naturally want to kill Daniel. They probably didn't feed him for a while. They probably wanted that lions good and hungry. And they come up. They go to do what lions do, and they see an angel of the Lord there, and animals have more sense than people do. And they said, I'm not going up against God. And the angel of the Lord saying, I don't care what you guys want. You come 5 inches of this guy and you're finished. And the lions are like, I don't have any part of it. They were probably laying down at a certain point. Maybe Daniel was even able to lay up against the back of one of the lions and, lay back on the fur and stuff and just get a good night's rest maybe. I don't know. But God was there. God was there to help him. Chapter 6, verse 23. Then the king, exceedingly glad for him, and commanded that they should take Daniel out of the den. So Daniel was taken up out of the den, and no manner of hurt was found. He didn't even have a scratch. Nothing wrong at all, because he believed in his God. And the king commanded, and they brought those men which accused Daniel, the ones that twisted the law to get what they wanted, and cast them into the den of lions, them, their children, their wives, and the lions had mastery over them, and brake all their bones in pieces, or ever they came at the bottom of the den. So everybody that went in there just destroyed them. Sin can affect your family. I don't know that these families were complicit with the decisions that those princes and presidents made, but their families suffered a cost at what they did. Then King Darius wrote unto all people, nations, and languages that dwell in all the earth, peace be multiplied unto you. I make a decree that in every dominion of my kingdom men tremble and fear before the God of Daniel, for he is a living God and steadfast forever. And his kingdom, that which shall not be destroyed, and his dominion shall be even unto the end. He delivereth and rescueth, and he worketh signs and wonders in heaven and in earth, who hath delivered Daniel from the power of the lions. So this Daniel prospered in the reign of Darius and in the reign of Cyrus the Persian. This isn't the first time with Daniel, whose testimony was so great that these kings made a proclamation. And when I say go back and read what Nebuchadnezzar said, you need to read what Nebuchadnezzar said at the end. You need to read what Darius said at the end. Because these are men that looked on somebody who had a testimony that was worth something. That's what the world's looking for. They're looking for people who have a testimony that's worth them losing friends over. They're looking for people that have a testimony that's worth losing family over. They need people that have a testimony and a joy about them that's worth maybe losing a job over. That was the kind of testimony that Daniel had. And I believe that God put this story in the Bible to show us what a testimony can do, to show us what obedience and discipline and faithfulness and reliability can do. something to show us, something that we can remember, because we can remember this story of Daniel. We can remember this lesson. We can think of it. We can mull it in our heads. And when we're out doing things, we can remember Daniel stood for God when he knew that his life was going to be ended for doing it. But he stood. He was faithful. He did it. And God put that story in there for us to learn something. So let's take this and let's learn something from it. Let's let it get in our heads and let's let it change us. This isn't a movie that Hollywood put out. This is a story from God's Word that He selected, He put in there for us to read, for us to understand, for us to learn from, for us to improve, for us to take and change ourselves. The Bible's full of those stories. They're all over the place. You could preach a month out of the book of Daniel. That's my challenge for you, is to take this, look at your testimony. Look at your testimony. Look at what impact it has on the people around you. Are you faithful? Are you doing everything you could? If somebody was going to try and capture you because of your faithfulness to God, would they be able to do it? Do you do things just automatically because that's what needs to be done, because it's what you're supposed to do? Or do you stop and think about it? Do you have the discipline in your life to just do what you're supposed to do? Are you so disciplined and reliable to God? Is He so important to you that if you wind up in a situation where someone's going to look at you and they're going to say, well, we can count on that guy. I may not believe what he believes about God, but you can count on that guy. He's not going to leave early. He's not going to come in late. He's not going to come into work drunk. He's not going to steal from the office. He's not going to do all these things because there's just something different about that guy. See if we're that person. What song do you have for us? 328. Okay, I don't know what it is, but let's sing 328. While we're singing, just think about that. Think about your testimony that you have with the world, your testimony with God, and think about these stories in the Bible and how we can use them to be who God needs us to be.